My teacher looked my father in the eye and called me a liar while her own red ink was still staining my hands. We are raised to trust the people in charge. But Miss Harlow was a predator who specialized in destroying student confidence. How do you prove a teacher is gaslighting you when the entire school believes she's a saint? She thought she was grading my final paper, but she was actually signing her own professional death warrant. She looked at those pages like they belonged to someone else. Her handwriting, her corrections, her red ink bleeding through every margin of 3 separate drafts. And she stood in that office, looked my father dead in the eye, and told everyone in that room she had never written a single word of it. I want you to really picture that moment, because I had been carrying those papers in my backpack for 2 weeks. 3 drafts, dozens of red notes, her specific handwriting on every page. And she stood right there and called me a liar. But to understand how we got here, I need to take you back to where this all started. I want to be upfront that this story, as originally shared on a public forum, is told entirely from one person's perspective. That perspective is mine. And what happened changed the way I see myself and my own work for the rest of my life. I was a junior in high school. Honors English track since freshman year. Decent grades across the board. I was on the swim team up before dawn 3 mornings a week. Chlorine in my hair by 6 a.m. Then I wrote for the school newspaper. Not flashy. Not the kind of student teachers called out in front of the class as an example. Just steady. I trusted that if I worked hard enough, the results would show up. I genuinely believed that. Then I got placed into classical literature second semester. And I met Miss Harlow. From the outside, she was exactly the kind of teacher you wanted. Warm voice, patient explanations. She had this specific habit of tilting her head slightly when you asked her a question, like she was truly, carefully considering what you said before responding. Like every student's question personally mattered to her. The other kids loved her. I walked into that class feeling genuinely lucky. The first paper came back with A2. I stared at it for a long time. The margin notes were almost nothing. The only feedback was 2 words written at the bottom in her neat, slanted hand, uninspired assessment. I had never gotten below a C on a writing assignment, not once. I went to her after class and asked what I had done wrong. She said, "Come back during study hall, and I will help you understand." I showed up with a notebook, ready to learn. She did not show me a single example. She did not explain what uninspired meant in any way I could use. What she did, for the full length of that period, was explain to me carefully, with that same warm tilted head patience, why I was not smart enough for her class. Why my instincts were wrong. Why the way I thought about literature was simply not at the level required. She did it so calmly that I did not register what was happening until I was halfway down the hallway, and then it hit me all at once. I stood there and cried, alone, in a school hallway, because a teacher had just spent an hour telling me, very reasonably, that I was not enough. And get this, I went back, and no, I still think about that. I asked my best friend to help me with the next paper. She was the kind of student teachers referenced by name when talking about standards. We spent hours on that paper. Real hours. I turned it in genuinely hopeful. Another D. My best friend was furious in a way I was not yet letting myself be. She took my paper to the AP English teacher down the hall, told him she was working on a competition entry and wanted feedback. He read it and called it strong, solid work. A minus, maybe better. Then she showed him my first paper. He said that one was even stronger. He would have given it an A without hesitation. Here is the thing, though. I still was not ready to say out loud what I was starting to suspect. Because some part of me, of the part that had sat in that study hall and listened to her quiet, reasonable voice explain exactly why I was not good enough, had actually started to believe her. That is the part I am most honest about when I tell this story. I was not ready to call it unfair. I was not ready to say she was doing it on purpose. I just thought maybe I needed to try harder. So I went back to her 3 more times before the next paper was due. I sat across her desk and let her mark up my drafts in red pen. I took notes. I revised exactly the way she told me to. I worked harder on that 3rd paper than I had worked on anything that year. She handed it back with a D+, and she smiled at me when she did it, that same warm, patient, tilted head smile, and said, "Congratulations on the improvement. That was the moment I stopped doubting myself and started paying very close attention. I had 3 drafts of that third paper. Every single one covered in her red corrections. Her handwriting. Her specific lowercase e's. Her underlining. I put them in a folder. I did not know yet exactly what I was going to do with them. I just knew I was not letting them go. I did not go to my parents first. I did not go to a counselor. I went to my swim coach. I sat across from him after practice and told him I was in danger of losing my eligibility because I was pulling a D in a class one could not explain. He asked me what I meant by that. I told him I had asked for help multiple times and the grade was not moving. He looked at me for a long moment, then asked to see the papers. I watched his face while he read them. He did not say anything for a while. Just read. Then he asked me who else had seen these. I walked him through all of it. My best friend, the AP English teacher down the hall who had graded them without knowing why. The newspaper advisor I had asked last. He asked me what every one of them had said. I told him. He went quiet in the way adults go quiet when they have already made a decision. The athletics director was brought in next. Then the student vice principal. Each one read the papers and arrived at the same expression, somewhere between confused and very carefully controlled. The AP English teacher and my newspaper advisor were both asked to formally grade all 3 papers on record. Between the 2 of them, every paper came back at an A- or better. Now, stay with me here because right around this time, something happened that made me genuinely question everything I thought I understood. Ms. Harlow stopped by the newspaper room one afternoon while I was working on an article. She was friendly, warmer than usual, actually. She asked how I was doing, said she had noticed I seemed stressed lately, told me she hoped things were going better. And for just a moment, I want to be honest about this, I felt a small, stupid flicker of hope. Maybe she was going to make it right on her own. Maybe this was her way of reaching out before it went further. Maybe I had been holding onto those papers for nothing. Hey, before we go any further, if this story is landing the way I think it is, a subscribe genuinely means everything on a channel this size. Okay, back to it because it is about to get so much worse. I almost talked myself into letting it go. Not gonna lie, I sat with that thought for 2 full days. I ran through what it would cost to push forward and what it would cost to just finish the semester and be done. I thought about how much easier quiet would be, how much energy I was spending on something that might never land the way I needed it to. Then I remembered the way she smiled when she handed back that D++. That smile closed the door. A meeting was scheduled. My father was called in, the athletics director, the student VP, Ms. Harlow, and me. The night before, I laid out everything on my desk. 3 draft versions of the third paper, each one covered in red corrections in her specific handwriting, the lowercase e's, the way she underlined for emphasis, the margin abbreviations that were hers and no one else's, the original graded copy with the D+ at the top. I organized them in order, slid them into a folder, and put them in my backpack. And I want you to really picture this. I was 16 years old, exhausted from early morning practices, carrying a near-failing grade in a class one had no reason to be failing, and sitting at my desk at 11 at night. I was completely calm, not angry, not scared, just certain. That kind of certainty at 16 is a strange thing to feel. I have thought about where it came from a lot since then. Ms. Harlow walked into that meeting the next morning like she had already won. She sat down across from my father, crossed her ankles, folded her hands on the table, and waited with the patience of someone who had been through rooms like this before and always walked out the same way she walked in, confident and hurried, like this whole thing was a minor inconvenience she was graciously agreeing to resolve. She had no idea what was in that folder. The student VP opened calmly. He explained the eligibility concern. He said everyone was there to figure out the right path forward. Nothing threatening. Nothing that should have rattled her at all. Then he asked her directly in her assessment, had I ever made a genuine effort to improve? She barely paused. Said I had never sought help. Never come to her for guidance. Said I lacked the academic foundation for honors-level work. Said all of it in the same patient, measured tone like a diagnosis she was sorry to be delivering. My father sat very still. The kind of still that meant he was not trusting himself to speak yet. The VP reached into the folder in front of him and slid the papers across the table toward her. 3 drafts. Red ink everywhere. Her handwriting on every single page. She looked at them, and something in her face shifted, not all at once, but the way a building settles before it gives. A tightening around the eyes. A pause that ran just a beat too long. The trap had been set for weeks. Every piece was in place. She just had to decide what to do next. She said the notes were not hers. She said it calmly. She said she had not written them. She looked at my father and said I had fabricated the whole thing. Can you imagine? I was 16 years old, and she told an entire room full of adults calmly, with that same tilted head patience, that I had somehow forged her handwriting across 3 separate drafts over 3 separate weeks and predicted in advance that I would need them. The room went very loud very fast. My father, who was not a loud man, became a loud man. The athletics director had read those papers twice by that point and was not quiet either. The AP English teacher and my newspaper advisor were called back in. Both of them confirmed in writing independently, without having coordinated, that they had reviewed and graded the papers before this meeting. Both called it a level work. Neither of them had any reason to protect me. They had no idea at the time where any of this was going. I was asked to wait outside. This is the part I still think about. Sitting in that hallway on a wooden bench, listening to 6 adults argue so loudly the secretary at the front desk had stopped pretending to type and was just sitting there with me in silence. It went on long enough that the hallways started filling up with students heading to first period. I watched kids walk past and wondered if any of them had ever felt the specific thing I was feeling right then. Not victorious, not relieved, just waiting. Very still and very tired and waiting. When the door finally opened, Miss Harlow walked out without looking at me. I was moved to a different English class that same day. My grade would not carry over. I would not need to make up any past work. New teacher. Fresh start. Effective immediately. My new teacher was the head of the English department. She had been doing this longer than my parents had been alive. Her classroom smelled like old paper and coffee, and she wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck. After 2.5 years in honors, her class covered material I had already taught myself. I could have coasted. I did not coast. I refused, and I mean this deliberately. I refused to let what Miss Harlow had said about me become true just because someone else's expectations were lower. I worked harder in that class than I had worked anywhere that semester. Finished projects early. Started helping a girl in my row who was struggling, quiet, anxious about her grades. The kind of kid who reminded me of the version of myself from the start of the year. The one who had walked out of a study hall crying and not entirely sure what had just happened to her. I helped that girl bring her grade up by 2 full letters before the semester ended. I finished with a score above 100% near the end of the year. My teacher called me in during study hall. She told me she was recommending me for honors English senior year. She must have caught something in my face, because she quickly added Miss Harlow would not be my teacher. In fact, she said, Miss Harlow would not be anyone's teacher. She was leaving the school at the end of the year, permanently. I sat with that for a moment. Then she told me something that completely undid me. She said the administration had placed me in her class on purpose. They had trusted her, specifically, to figure out the truth of what had been happening in Miss Harlow's classroom. And her assessment after a full semester of watching me work was this: I had always belonged in honors English. She apologized if her class had not been challenging enough for me. I want you to understand what happened to me in that moment. Because I thought I had processed it. I thought I had come out the other side of the whole thing intact. I had the papers. I had the meeting. I had the outcome. I thought I was fine, but sitting in that chair, hearing her say plainly, without drama, without making a thing of it, that I had always been good enough, I realized something I had not let myself realize before. I had been carrying Miss Harlow's voice in my head the entire time, that calm, patient, reasonable voice, the one that had spent an entire study hall explaining, very specifically, all the ways I was not enough. I thought I had let it go. I had not let it go. I had just gotten very good at working around it. I cried. The ugly kind. The kind that surprises you. She hugged me and I let her, which is not something I do easily. I have been writing professionally for years now. I still hear that voice sometimes. Not as loud, not as often, but on deadline, on the days when something I make does not land the way I meant it to, it is there. It is still there. She did not take my confidence. I want to be clear about that. But she made me build it from scratch. Every single day. She did not take my confidence. I want to be clear about that. But she made me build it from scratch. Every single day.